Hello, my name is Dr. Dave Webster, and this is part of my ongoing video blog series on the travesty of the lack of access of PET-CT in Ontario. This particular video is entitled, Yes, McMaster Really Is Performing Unethical and Immoral Experiments on Ontario's Cancer Patients. Now, I sent, in the spring of this year, I sent a letter to the Research Ethics Board and asked them to comment on the PET Predict trial, which was run on over 300 unsuspecting women with early-stage breast cancer. So Dr. Inman, who's the chair of the Hamilton Integrated Research Ethics Board, has finally responded to my letter. And I have to say that even after 15 years of dealing with the kind of people that would do this to these women, it is still shocking when you can no longer deny that people you would like to imagine are educated, decent, moral, and ethical individuals would stoop so low. Yet my dealings with the senior administration at McMaster University makes it clear that you simply cannot be cynical enough. Turns out if you give them enough money, and remember this is taxpayer money, they will do whatever the Ontario politicians want them to do or say. And what they want them to do or say is that the Ontario politicians will decide what they're going to pay through OHIP, and then the job of McMaster and Cancer Care Ontario will be to then generate the so-called quality evidence that justifies this already made decision. Worse, McMaster University will be key in developing the tools which are called the Health Technology Assessment Tools to do just that. And everyone from CCO and McMaster agrees when pushed is that there actually is zero scientific basis or validity to justify the use of health technology assessment. Now, this is Dr. Inman's response from October, and this is a classic example of what the Greeks called sophistry, which is the use of fallacious arguments, particularly with the intention of deceiving. This letter is a thinly veiled attempt to try and give some justification to what they've done. Now, any informed audience would immediately recognize that the PET Predict trial was absolutely and clearly a blatant, unethical, and ultimately immoral trial performed on these unsuspecting women. But this letter is not aimed at an informed medical audience. It is aimed at the general public who, when they assume that what McMaster University is doing must be ethical. I assure you, it's not. But most importantly, this letter will ultimately serve as talking points for our, let's call them alternative truth writers or free press journalists, should the actual facts of what the HIRB, the Research Ethics Board, has actually done to these patients, if that information becomes public, and then their job will be to try and discredit me. Now, there's many aspects of this trial that are unethical. I'm just going to cover two of them. If you want to see all the parts that are unethical, I invite you to go to my video blog site, and this is the title of it, and these are my other social media sites. Now, as you watch this video, I want you to keep in mind the statements of Dr. Al Dreger, who is the most senior member of Cancer Care Ontario PET Steering Committee, when he resigned from that committee and discussed in 2009, and what he said, and I quote, "What those who are blocking PET in Ontario are doing borders on immoral." Then Professor Rodney Hicks is a respectable expert on PET-CT from Australia, and what he said, and I quote, "Ontario has the most egregious and politically motivated agenda against PET in the world." That was in July 2016. And of course, read our patients. Now, this is the original publication, April 2012, in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, complicated name, but let's just look at the stated aim or purpose. FDG PET is potentially useful in assessing lymph nodes and detecting distant metastasis in women with primary cancer. I want you to really keep in mind that the aim is FDG PET is potentially useful clinically for these patients. What they conclude is that FDG PET is not sufficiently sensitive to detect positive axillary lymph nodes, nor is it sufficiently specific to appropriately identify distant metastasis. Now, FDG PET would be compared to a surgical biopsy of what we call sentinel lymph nodes in the patient's axilla during breast cancer surgery. So let's assume the patient had a cancer of the right breast. Typically, these cancers will spread first to these lymph nodes in the axilla. So during surgery, what happens is the surgeon will remove some of these sentinel nodes, and they looked at it under the microscope to determine whether there's metastasis. Now, if the women they chose for the trial had any metastasis to the lymph nodes, by definition, they would have to be microscopic metastasis. And of course, the only way to detect this would be under a microscope, and the sentinel node biopsy is the only clinical method of identifying metastatic disease that these patients might have had in the patients that they chose. And this is critical to know this because even microscopic metastasis will dramatically change the significance of the impact on the patient's survival. Now, the Declaration of Helsinki is a document on the ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. It's very clear. It is unethical to deliberately design a trial to fail. So let's look at Dr. Inman's letter response. And I quote, "Furthermore, there is no evidence in the application to suggest that the investigators designed the trial to fail." Let's go back to the aim. FDG PET is potentially useful as a clinical tool. But, of course, the PET camera or any other imaging device then or now is simply physically incapable of seeing microscopic disease. By deliberate design, the experiment had no choice but to fail, and thus PET FDG could not possibly have a clinical role in the patients they chose. Those writing the trial knew this, and now so does Dr. Inman, Dr. Paul O'Byrne, who's the Dean of McMaster Health Sciences, and the Senior Administration from McMaster University. So, there can be no further doubt. McMaster University Research Ethics Board did knowingly and deliberately approve, and to this day condones a trial in women with early-stage breast cancer that had to fail. This is a very serious breach of the Declaration of Helsinki. This declaration also talks about something called equipoise, kind of a funny word, but what it really means is this, that if it becomes apparent during the trial that the clinical proposal will fail, then the experiment must be stopped immediately. Now, the research ethics boards, they don't just approve the trials, they monitor them during the trial to ensure that ethical principles are being strictly followed. Now, Dr. Karen Galantian is one of the authors of this paper, and early on in the trial, she gave a talk to the Ontario Association of Nuclear Medicine at one of our meetings, and what she said was, and I quote, "We are seeing a lot of positive lymph nodes from the sentinel nodes, but negative PET," under the microscope, of course, right? As if there was a surprise. Now, Dr. Imman's response to my question on equipoise quotes, "There was equipoise for the stated aim." Let's review the stated aim of the PET predictor trial. FDG PET is potentially useful in detecting the lymph node metastasis. So, was the PET predictor trial on these women stopped when it was immediately obvious it would fail because it had to fail? No. Over 300 unsuspecting and anxious breast cancer patients were put through this clinical trial. So, my public declaration is this, that the HIRB's statement about not violating the ethical principle of equipoise is blatantly false. The PET predictor trial was a gross violation of the Declaration of Helsinki regarding equipoise. HIRB's past and present actions are knowingly and therefore deliberately increasing the physical harm and unnecessary emotional stress to a group of already highly stressed women with breast cancer. So Ontario, to this day, remains the only medical jurisdiction on the planet that continues to deny that FDG PET-CT can provide critical information for their management, and it is based on this PET PREDICT trial. Now, what the Research Ethics Board for McMaster University has done is not only disgraceful, but flagrantly unethical and immoral. Fundamentally, at the most fundamental level, there is no difference between the horrific abuses political regimes have perpetrated on members of society based on race, religion, or ideology, and what continues to this day by McMaster University physicians and scientists. The only difference is they have focused on helping Ontario politicians target some of Ontario's sickest and most distressed patients, our cancer patients. So, one final question to Dr. Inman and the Research Ethics Board. The condemnation by Canadian and international medical experts has been with respect to the ethical and moral basis of the Ontario PET trials. Therefore, is the HIRB prepared to demand that the 2005 Canadian Association of Nuclear Medicine motions demanding a review of the ethical basis of the Ontario PET trials takes place immediately? But if you're not prepared to do that, it is expected that you will provide a detailed and non-sophistry explanation to defend your declaration that the PET PREDICT trial is consistent with the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, the sun's likely to rise in the west first, right? So I need your help to get this information out in spite of the efforts of our most trusted sources of news and information so that Ontario patients can finally have access to 2018 levels of medical care. Thanks for watching.